To call a member for Dawson.
Mr Deputy Speaker, the former President of Poland, the late Lech Kaczynski, a once fighter against the repressive Soviet puppet government in his country through the trade union movement, warned that countries that give up the death penalty award an unimaginable advantage to the criminal over his victim, the advantage of life over death. In Australia, in 1973, the death penalty was abolished for federal offences. And in 2010, the former Rudd government passed laws that prevented the death penalty from being reintroduced by any state or territory in Australia. I know the death penalty has not been used as a punishment in this country since 1967, but in effectively removing the capability for the nation or any of the states to reintroduce that penalty, I say this Parliament gave an unimaginable advantage to the criminal over the victim. I also say that this House of Representatives, in doing that, and in supporting a motion such as this before us today, fails to live up to its name. To be truly representative on this issue, we would adhere to the views of the general public on this issue instead of the views of Amnesty International or the United Nations. One poll I found that was conducted on the question of support or opposition to the death penalty was less than a decade ago and was specifically regarding terrorism. In August 2003, Newspoll conducted an extensive survey asking the question as to whether respondents were in favour or against the introduction of the death penalty in Australia for those found guilty of committing major acts of terrorism. The result was 56% of respondents supported the death penalty in those circumstances, as opposed to only 36% against. I may be a minority in this place when I say I too support the death penalty for terrorists and for those found guilty of the most heinous of crimes: murder of a child, particularly those involving rape, murder of an elderly person or a person with disabilities, again, particularly those involving rape. I may be a minority in this place when I say that, but I can tell you that it is not a minority view in the electorate at large. That fact is acknowledged by even the Australian Coalition Against the Death Penalty, which admits on its website that there are recent polls showing 70% of Australians support capital punishment for heinous crimes. I turn now but to one case that I believe fully warrants the death penalty: the vicious murder of Zara Baker, a young girl originally from Garua, my electorate of Dawson. According to a staff member at a Garua daycare centre, Zara seemed very happy. She always came in with a smile on her face. She was at preschool then and diagnosed with cancer. She went away for treatment. She was a very happy, determined little girl. She was willing to give anything a go. She was a little girl struck down with cancer at a young age. She went through chemotherapy and all the horrors that involves and lost a leg to that terrible disease. Zara moved with her father and stepmother to America, a terrible move given what transpired. But in the darkness, the shining light may be that true justice can be served, given the crime occurred in North Carolina, where the death penalty is still an option. The tiny body of Zara Baker now lies scattered across the woodlands and in the creeks in a small North Carolina town. The autopsy on her found that there were 2 different cutting instruments used to dismember this little girl, and a skull has never been found. I won't speak about that matter in greater detail, and I won't point out potential suspects, although there's something that's readily available through the media. What I will say, though, is if the police are able to find this killer and prove it in the court of law, and all the information is pointing to that conclusion, then I say the death penalty would be the only just penalty to fit the seriousness of that crime against that young girl. And some people may rule from that statement, but from our protected world here in Canberra, we aren't exposed to the great evils out there, and I suppose it would be the same for a Hollywood actor. In his book Mindhunter, former FBI serial profiler John Douglas talked about the actor Scott Glenn coming to see him to do research for a character he played in Silence of the Lambs. Douglas recounted, "Glenn was a pretty liberal guy who had strong feelings on rehabilitation, redemption and the fundamental goodness of people. Douglas showed him crime scene photos and let him listen to recordings of killers torturing their victims. I made him listen to one of 2 teenage girls in Los Angeles being tortured to death in the back of a van by 2 thrill-seeking killers who'd recently been let out of prison," Douglas wrote. Glenn said after seeing and hearing what he did in my office, he could no longer oppose the death penalty. I want to talk about deterrence, Mr Speaker, and repeated empirical evidence suggests that capital punishment has had a deterrent effect on this. That is proven. I make no apologies for supporting the victim over the criminal.